And we're back, Craig. It's the Barkology podcast. We had a fucking dope episode today.
Episode 13 was by far my favorite so far.
Maybe the most controversial, though. It might have been the most controversial, but we had a expert on raw feeding when it comes to dogs.
Raw dog feeding.
Yeah, his name was Scott Marshall. You can follow him on Instagram at dogdadofficial.com. Oh, no, dogdadofficial on Instagram, not .com.
You can do it.
But it was so much fun. I hope you guys enjoy it. He tells you where you can follow him at the end of the episode, but it was a lot of fun. He was a wealth of knowledge. Let's get into it, brother.
Let's do this, baby.
That's amazing.
The dogs.
Is that even a real story?
That's a fact.
This is complete nonsense, Greg.
Read a book.
I guess you are kind of artistic.
Incredible.
What are you even talking about, man?
Go for broke.
I don't even know what that means. Let's get it going.
Let's get her going. Keep her going, baby.
Hello, folks. We are back again, and today, as I said, we are here with a very special guest. His name is Scott Marshall. If you want to follow him, he is at DogDadOfficial on Instagram. And just talking with him before the podcast started, he sounds like the man. He has been a raw feeder for almost 9 years. And at this point, he's really just trying to bring awareness to everyone about raw dog feeding. Right? I don't know if I'm saying that the right way, Greg, but
Raw dog feeding.
It sounds good, but he's trying to really, bring awareness to the benefits. He wants to kind of cancel out some of those, fallacies that a lot of people might think about feeding your dog raw food. But he's also moved into teaching people about raw feeding, and it's become his full-time occupation. So we're very, very excited to have him on. And do you want to say anything, Greg?
Yeah, I just want to start off by saying, obviously, if anyone's listened to the podcast or you're new to the podcast, Scott and I are clearly not dog experts in the least bit. We like to keep things light, like to keep things fun, tell some true fun stories about dogs. So we really, really enjoy having people like Scott on just to talk about these really important topics and important issues, right? Raw dog feeding. No.
I know it sounds funny when I say it, but
100 times.
Raw feeding dogs.
Raw feeding dogs. Thank you, Scott. Scott. With that, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So my name is Scott, like they said, on the socials, as we'll call it, whether it's my YouTube channel, Instagram, Facebook, wherever. People know me as either Dog Dad or Scott the Dog Dad or Scott Dog Dad or some combo of those three words being put together.
Love it.
And
perfect.
I've been, like they were saying, feeding raw for almost 9 years now. In about August, September, I'd have to look back and look at the exact date because I have it, but it'll be 9 years then. I started teaching people in one format or another with an app, a free app that I put out through a company that I worked for at the time in 2014, and it's just really progressed from there. I saw that I couldn't give people the personal touch, the kind of not necessarily one-on-one, but I just couldn't give them enough in icons and articles and all that kind of stuff. And so I then graduated to putting out a course, and now I do one-on-one consultations, transition programs where, we work together live over video and phone calls. And so it's really just turned into this whole huge thing where there's the YouTube channel. I've got the Facebook group that's got like 23,000 people in it at this point. And I mean, it's just turned into, like they were saying, my full-time occupation because I love dogs and I don't want to see them go away too early, see people lose their dogs too early.
Oh, that's awesome, man. That was a great introduction. So just because I still feed my dog, not kibble, but I feed them just, regular dog food that I would pick up at the supermarket. What is the difference? I mean, when you say raw feeding, what does that mean?
So the easiest way to say it, you could ask 100 different people and get 100 different answers, truthfully. But when we boil it down to the nuts and bolts, it's, kibble or even canned food being, more traditionally available dog foods where they're mass manufactured, and there are mass manufactured raw foods, but we're talking about, like the Iams and the pedigrees and the stuff like that. Dry foods, canned foods. The big difference between those and raw foods would be that with raw feeding, we're trying to copycat Mother Nature. Basically, we're trying to build as close as we possibly can with realizing the problems that some of these wild dogs, canines, get into. We're trying to copycat Mother Nature with their diet. So we're providing them things like meat, raw bones, raw organs, fur, feathers. I mean, all of it. If there's a wild canine out there hunting it, then it's something that we consider putting into their diet. Obviously not all at once, because we can't have everything in there all at once, but
So the good
that's
stuff.
what we're trying to do. And the main problem with the kibbles is that, we'll just call them, I'm just going to say kibble, but when I say kibble throughout the podcast, I'm just addressing specifically traditionally available dog foods.
You're blanketing the entire, basically, commercial dog food scheme.
Yeah,
I guess.
and maybe, I'm not going to do that. Actually, I'm just going to say traditionally available dog foods, because I want to kind of put them all together, because whether it's canned foods or whether it's dry dog foods, whatever it is, the same problems come up. And the main problems is that they're just not species appropriate. I mean, it is literally the only health industry at this point that recommends feeding a high carbohydrate, high sugar diet, saying that you can eat one thing all the time, never change it, and that everything is going to be perfect. If I went to my doctor today and said, I'm going to eat 40% or 50% sugar and carbs, is that cool? My doctor would be like, are you nuts? But if you ask the vet that, most vets, I don't want to blanket it, and I don't want to dog on vets, because I love them and we need them. They're amazing, beautiful people. But too many of them will say, yeah, that's totally fine, which is a problem.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say you just covered about 90% of the American diet, carbs and sugar. So,
especially when you get down to the poverty level. I mean, I think poverty at this, or the poverty income level right now is like $15,000. But you get down to that point and people are spending basically all of their money either on lottery tickets or fast food. So, we don't want to put our dogs through that, and everything you just said is awesome. And I think
poverty is considered 21,000. The median income is considered 50. Sorry, that's what I do.
All right. Well, 15 either way. All right, good. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for your So yeah, I mean, that's awesome. Did you have something else to say initially, Greg?
I just wanted to know, Scott, what kind of dogs do you have?
I have 2 white male German Shepherds that are brothers that have a litter in between them, so they have the same parents. They're actual full-blood brothers. One of them we got through what I call an adoption. It just wasn't a typical, I went to the shelter or an adoption agency. He actually was from a breeder that I had been talking to for a little over a year at the time, and his original owners couldn't take care of him anymore, so we took him in at about 9-10 months, and then a year later we actually got his younger brother Horace from the breeder that his older brother Vulcan originally came from. So those are what we got.
Awesome. So being a white German Shepherd, is that considered one of the primary coat colors or no?
It is, and I really don't even need to say white German Shepherd, because some people have wanted to start calling it its own separate breed, which genetics and logic and science would completely disagree with them. But, if a black female German Shepherd and a classic, black saddle with brown cop dog German Shepherd have puppies, and a white puppy comes out, I'm saying that's a German Shepherd. It's not a different breed. But the only reason that I say white German Shepherd at the beginning is to bring awareness to the fact that they are just German Shepherds, and they are not genetically rare. It's just that when most people breed them, they're trying to breed for the classic cop dog, because that's what most people want, is that look. Mm-hmm. But if we look back at the German Shepherd's history, when Max von Stephanitz was making the breed, he went around and spent years searching dog shows in Europe for what he was trying to build was the perfect working dog. Mm-hmm. And one of the original 4 dogs was a white male dog. So it's literally been there since the beginning of the establishment of the breed. So
Interesting. No, that's awesome. Very cool. And say their names again, because they were a little bit unique. It's not like, Spot and Sparky. What were your dog's names again?
So the oldest one that was named by the original owners, his name is Vulcan. If you wanted to pronounce it correctly, it'd be Vulcan, because it's a German word that means cloud. Because he looks like a big old cloud. And then
Nice.
the younger brother, his name is Horace, and he got his name because my wife is an Egypt crazy person. She's just in love with Egypt, and he was actually an engagement gift. And so when we named him, I named him from an Egypt, I guess you could say, source origin. So that's where that came from.
Huh. That's a great gift. And I do have to say that Vulcan didn't see the translation cloud coming at all. Sounds way more badass than cloud.
Right?
Yeah.
It when we watched the first new Star Trek with him in the room, and they kept saying Planet Vulcan, he kept looking over at the TV like, who's saying my name?
That's hilarious.
Oh man, that's funny. All right, so I just wanted to bring up one thing that I'm kind of comparing the raw feeding and raw dog food aspect that you're bringing to the table right now with real life humans. And it seems like a lot of these diets, or whatever you want to call it seem to be trends, whether it's the paleo diet associated with CrossFit or just any sort of plant-based diet, the keto diet. Everybody is a little bit different. It seems like most of the time everybody's going to benefit from changing their diet to one of these particular diets, whether it's paleo or plant-based, whatever it is, but they're transitioning from something worse. I mean, could you compare that? Like, if you took a human that's eaten fast food all day and transition them into just eating normal food, normal whole-based plant-based food, whatever it is. I mean, is that kind of what you're doing with the dogs by switching them to the raw diet?
Yeah, it's exactly what we're doing. I mean, because if you start looking back at, people weren't putting together meals in the same way that we're putting them together now when we talk about raw feeding. But, 150 years ago, what the typical dog was eating was table scraps, and they were catching their own food on, the farm property or wherever it was that they happened to be, because by that time they're pretty much all living with us. Mm-hmm. So, but nobody 150 years ago was feeding their dogs kibble, because it didn't exist yet. They were getting table scraps, and what it came from was a place of convenience. Like, people needed something that was inexpensive, that was cheap, that they could feed their dogs all the time, and I say this loosely, quote unquote, balanced, and they could just feed forever. And I mean, really, that's kind of what we've done with human food, right? We've gone to a quick, easy to access, inexpensive, available everywhere food consumption style, to where, while it is easy, while it is convenient, and while it is in many aspects inexpensive, it has major health impacts. Like we were talking about pre-podcast, or pre-recording, I guess I should say. If you took a person and gave them a mostly, or maybe we're recording, I don't know. If you take a person and feed them mostly carbohydrates, that's going to be a huge problem, especially if all those carbohydrates are from processed sources. Like, you could say, I'm going to hit my 1,800 calories or whatever, because that's what MyFitnessPal says that I need to do to lose weight. But 50% of those calories came from popcorn. I mean, that's a huge problem. Even if the other 50% of it was great, awesome foods, which it probably wouldn't be if 50% of your diet's popcorn.
Yeah,
but it's going to create a huge problem.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I was just, sedentary lifestyles kind of play into this huge, because although everybody thinks that they're walking their dog enough or running their dog enough or getting their dog enough exercise, even if they're on, whatever diet they're on, if they're just sitting at home like a lot of America is right now, it's not going to be beneficial. So I didn't mean to interrupt you right there. I think that plays into what you're saying right now.
No, and you're absolutely right, because the longest living dog on the planet that we know of right now, I think the name was Maggie. I could be confusing it with another one of the long livers, but they lived to be, I think it was 35, and
wow,
they spent
what?
35, and they spent every single day almost getting raw milk from the farm cows and running miles upon miles upon miles upon miles and miles across farmland, chasing and following the farmer and his farming equipment. And
That's
that is
awesome.
one of the main contributors. There's the health, which they say is, 40-50% of this huge problem. And then there's the sedentary lifestyle. Like, I have videos and stuff where I tell people, your raw feeding mistake part one is that you're not exercising your dogs enough, because you can feed the best diet on the planet, but if your dog spends their entire life on the couch, they're not going to be a healthy dog.
Sure. And I have a question here. So how much of a factor do you think genetics come into play with this? So you think German Shepherd, you think hip problems, you think
Yep.
Golden Retriever, cancer.
Yeah, labs cancer,
Do you think a
pugs,
change?
eye problems.
Right. So if you think a change in a diet to this raw feeding helps to alleviate a majority of those issues, or is it still majority of it being genetics, like I think we've been told for so long?
I think that it is all of it. So here's what I mean by that. And I'm going to use this kind of point system, taking it as an idea from a documentary slash film, whatever you want to call it, called the Dog Cancer series that Rodney Habib and Dr. Karen Becker put out, where you basically have your dog, and they have their genetic code, dispositions, whatever you want, and they can only take, whether it's their immune system, whether it's their body as a whole, whether it's genetic markers that could be activated or could not be activated, and they have so many hits that they can take. Like, I don't know, I guess the weird kind of geeky way to think of it would be like hit points, right? So this dog's going to have 5, this dog's going to have 10, this dog's going to have 7. And the more times that we hit them with things, not literally hit them, please don't hit your dogs, but what I mean is, we give them no exercise, that's 1 hit. We give them a poor diet, that's 1 hit. We have things like, incense and candles in the house all the time, that's 1 hit. And you just keep going down this list, and eventually these little genetic markers where, maybe that's cancer, maybe that's heart problems, maybe that's pulmonary issues, maybe, who knows, whatever it is. But eventually, when we start throwing all these different things at our dogs, they break in an aspect. You can give somebody, asking the question, is somebody holding a brick a problem? Like, well, no. Okay, well, what about 10 bricks? Well, what about 15? What about 20? Eventually, these bad things, being the brick in this example, become too much, and it is like a domino effect. When one part of the health goes, the rest of it goes over time.
Yeah, wow. It's interesting. It made me think about my fiance, and not to the full degree that you just described, but she has juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. So growing up, she didn't really know what was going on for the longest time. She'd go to several different specialists. She'd talk to several different doctors. And then finally she realized, hey, I have a huge gluten intolerance. She has celiac disease on top of that. But a lot of what it comes down to, and it's taken about 20 years of her life to figure it out, is, your gut biome and certain things like that. And there's a lot of these remedies that aren't pharmaceutical remedies, like CBD oil and things like that, are hugely beneficial. Her diet, if she adds on the CBD oil and things like that, it almost negates the JRA and the celiac disease. And I think if we do that with dogs as well, and you feed them a raw diet, you exercise them, you don't let them sit on the couch, it's going to be hugely beneficial, and maybe we'll see more 34-year-old dogs.
Right.
Yep.
But so you mentioned one thing in your little spiel there. You said candles and incense in the house. What does that? How does that play into what we're talking about right now?
So, and it sucks. Like, I'm going to say it right now. It absolutely sucks, because I am a total personal fan of incense. Like, I used to love burning them. My wife was a total Scentsy fanatic. But when it comes down to it, when we start looking at these things, it's another one of those, hit points that we're putting on our dogs and ourselves when it comes to things like pulmonary issues, cancer, etc. But when we start, when we start looking at the things that are in these, incense, candles, Scentsies, all these different things, they're pumping things like carcinogens into our house on a daily basis. And when you have something like a Scentsy going essentially 24 hours a day, and then I don't know, this is a little bit not too much, but you light a candle in the bathroom or you light an incense in your room while you meditate or something like that, then you're literally just throwing more things at yourself, more things at your dog. And who knows? I mean, maybe your dog was strong enough to take the hit point from the poor exercise. Maybe your dog was strong enough to take the hit point from the poor diet, but the carcinogens constantly coming into their body was the thing that finally flipped that switch that turned on cancer.
Yeah, just that straw that broke the camel's back. And like everything we're talking about reminds me a lot. I mean, even if you look at diets today, is everyone seems to be comparing. And the only reason I say this and relating this to humans is the dogs is just our ancestral, physical hardware and trying to revert ourselves back to that. And it just sounds like there's a lot of similarities to what you're talking about to that.
Yeah, and it's a constellation of clues, it's just adding one thing on top of another. And you call them hit points, but yeah, it's just you constantly add one thing on another. And it's, that it's not going to be beneficial, but if you don't literally look at it from a 30,000 foot view, you're never going to realize that, hey, I'm actually putting my dog or I'm putting myself in a shitty situation. You know what I mean?
100%. And it's kind of, when we look at the word holistic, like we're talking about holistic veterinarians and stuff like that, what it really means is looking at everything as a whole. So instead of just saying, let's treat your dog's, I don't know, ear infection or something like that, when we start talking about all these problems with our dogs and the hit points, it's really a holistic and not necessarily organic or hippy dippy or anything like that approach. A holistic being looking at everything and going, okay, well, what am I doing to make this situation worse? Like, having the candles burning all the time, having the incense going all the time, having the Scentsy burning 24 hours a day. And as somebody that has pulmonary problems and somebody, shout out to your fiance, somebody that also has problems with gluten, I mean, having those things gone makes so many things so much better. Like compared to like for example, the amount of times that I have to use my inhaler now versus when we had Scentsys going and incense going 24 hours a day essentially is massive. There's no medication changes, nothing like that. It's huge. I mean, you have to look at your dogs as from a holistic standpoint if you want to try and give them the longest life possible.
That's awesome. So I have a quick question here since we're on this holistic dog health, human health topic. What's your opinion on fixing dogs or not?
Just because, and Greg's asking because he has a 1-year-old golden retriever that still has a red rocket hanging out the front of him. Right?
So he's got a pair of nuts on him, pretty sizable, and he's coming up on about a year and a half now.
Oh, year and a half, sorry.
Yeah, so there's just a lot of debate between myself, my girlfriend, my parents, myself, and the rest of the world, the vet, on whether you should actually get a dog fixed or not. Now, I'm leaning towards the side of not. Now, why I say that, I cannot see cutting off a dog's testosterone production as being beneficial for their health. Now, everyone says, oh, your dog's much more well-behaved, and he's going to try and hump everything, and what if he gets another dog pregnant? I'm leaning completely the opposite. If he gets a dog pregnant, I'm blaming that on the other dog's owner. They go into heat, say once a year, is it? And if you're foolish enough to just let your dog run around the dog park in heat, well, guess what? It's like having sex without birth control or protection. Like that's 100% your fault. Like, let's be honest right here.
Where are you going with this?
I don't know. So Scott, what's your opinion on that?
So first of all, I want to say this so that I'm coming from a balanced standpoint when everybody hears this. Yes. I have one dog who, before we got him, was already, neutered. And if you're talking about females and stuff, spayed. So my male was neutered before we got him, and he was neutered very young. We are not 100% sure, but we think around 3 to 4 months old.
Okay.
And was also, this is unrelated, but I have to bring it up every time because I never want anybody else to do this to their dogs ever, was also debarked. He actually had his vocal cords snipped because he had too much of a quote unquote alpha bark.
Is that a common thing? I've never heard of that actually.
I have never met or heard of anybody else that has done it to their dog. I can't even believe that it's legally allowed. I mean, it infuriates me.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, you mean you got a dog, and that's why they barked? Like, you should have never owned a dog ever.
Right.
That's so crazy, man. I mean, my dog, we write down lab on every, rental property that we had before we bought a house, but she's a lab pit bull mix, and her mom was like a 95-pound pit bull. So when she barks, I mean, it's a scary bark, even though she's a little loving dog. She looks just like a yellow lab, but I can't imagine taking that away from them just because it seems like it's a dominant bark. That's out of control.
Yeah, that's an example of, every dog should have a home, but not every home should have a dog. Like, there's just some people who should not have animals. And the kind of person that would, take a dog's voice, you're one of those people. I'm sorry if somebody's listening that did that, but you shouldn't.
Hey,
own
no,
a dog.
fuck him,
Don't
man. Fuck him,
apologize.
dude. Yeah, you don't need to apologize to him, man.
So, and the other one that I have had since he was 9 weeks old is almost, how old is that little bugger now? And I say little, and he's the small one at 83 pounds. But
Nice.
he is 7. There you go, 7.
Mm-hmm.
He has a birthday on New Year's Eve, so it always messes with my brain of like, wait a minute, it was this year, but then, like 6 hours later, it was this year, but he's 7. And he still has everything dangling. He hasn't been disconnected from
go.
everything. And I'll tell you this, behavior-wise, there's very little difference between the two of them. If a strange dog walks up, they react the exact same way. If a stranger walks into the house, they react the same way. They both get red rockets when they're excited. I mean, as far as that goes, I'm sure that there's evidence to support that, this is a possibility, but the possibility of something like that, in my opinion, isn't enough to quote unquote take their balls. But here's what I will say. One, I think that it is a good idea to de-sex, and there's a huge difference between de-sexing and neutering or spaying dogs after a certain point, and we'll get into that in a second.
Interesting.
But I also, more importantly, think that doing it before a year for small to medium-sized dogs, and even later, beyond 2 years for large to giant breed-sized dogs, is you are setting yourself up for heartache, health problems, vet visits, and so many things, because we have all kinds of clinical evidence. Since we are in a swearing podcast, I now realize, which is totally awesome.
Yeah. Go ahead, man.
We're really lucky Scott didn't swear within like the opening sentence of the podcast. So
Yeah. Go ahead.
So with ass loads of data out there saying that neutering or spaying your dogs before a year to 2 years causes everything from joint problems to heart problems to obesity problems to increasing some forms of cancers by 200 to 800%. I mean, not desexing. I need to rephrase that. Neutering or spaying your dogs before they are developed adults is a massive, massive problem that will cause you issues. It's just which ones and how many of them. I like to relate it to if you took a 12-year-old boy, or let's just stick with the boy example. If you took a 12-year-old boy and you chopped his nuts off at 12, is he going to develop into the man that he would have with his testicles? The answer is no.
he will have one hell of a singing voice.
Well, that's Michael Jackson had a great voice.
Ooh.
There's a lot of suspect information saying that he got chemically castrated. Who knows? That his dad's a crazy motherfucker, because he was. But yeah, I work in pharmaceutical sales. I used to sell a product that was for kids who went through central precocious puberty, meaning they went through puberty between the ages of 2 and 9. So like girls would grow boobs, or guys would have body odor and body hair. But the worst part about it was that they would their growth plates would fuse early.
Ooh.
So it becomes this situation, like you said, like there's no reason to restrict your dogs and obviously your kids at some point, but there's no reason to restrict them from what is naturally going to be given to them. And dogs have got to be a little bit like humans in that they're going to go through whatever puberty is for dogs. They're not all going to grow at the same pace. So I got my dog neutered at 12 weeks. And I like to
Yikes.
say she's doing okay, but she tore ACL last year, so who knows if that, there was
Played a
some sort of
factor,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly, man.
That's actually one of them. That's actually one of the common problems. And obviously, you were just doing what you were told was best and what you felt
Yeah.
was best, but it's just one of the common problems. I mean, we have the growth plate issue is one of the biggest ones. So if you have, like you guys are talking about, the two labs, the golden retriever, like I've got the German shepherds, the big breeds that have genetic dispositions to having hip, elbow, joint problems, all these things, and then you take your dog's ovaries or take your dog's testicles before they're done growing, like you're going to have a dog that has joint problems. Personal example here. Horace, the younger dog, zero joint problems, zero nothing. He's a little machine. The older dog, who has the, not exactly, but I'm just using exactly as a general statement, exactly the same exercise, exactly the same diet, exactly the same amount of time outside, inside, interaction with other people, like their lives are essentially the exact same. And the older dog, Wolken, started developing joint pain at 4 or 5 years old.
Oh, wow.
And this dog is almost twice that age now with zero signs. They're full blood brothers, have identical situations, raised by the same people, then came to us, raised by the same people. And we have these huge two opposite ends of the spectrum. And with what I know now, I know that a huge portion of it is the fact that he was neutered so young. There's obviously tons of other aspects, like, he's a 20-pound heavier dog and all kinds of other things. But I truly believe, and the data supports me, that one of his problems that set him up for these issues was the fact that he had everything taken, 3-4 months old.
Yeah.
Man, that's all right. So we've covered a lot. I mean, literally, we sat here and we were gonna get into it as far as we could. And all I want to know is, now that we've talked about this, how do I get started? How do I get my dog, and how do I afford, or I don't even know how much it is. How do we get into doing this ourselves?
So before we move on, I want to quickly
Sure.
address the D-sex thing.
Yes.
Sorry. I had that written down. I forgot to go back to it.
No, you're good. So the big difference between let's just use the male as an example because it's the easiest to relate to for us, but for people because it's visual. The difference between having a neuter and a D-sex is the difference between having a vasectomy and being castrated.
Gotcha.
So with a neuter, we're taking the dog's testicles. Like my older dog just has this little tuft of hair where his nuts used to be, right?
Yeah.
With a D-sex, we're essentially giving the dog a vasectomy. So they still get to keep their testicles. They still get to have their testosterone production, all the other hormone production and, maintenance, balance that comes from their testicles and or their ovaries. All that we are doing is cutting off the flow of semen. That's all that we're doing with a D-sex, is taking away their ability to reproduce without just taking everything. And it's becoming a more and more available practice and a more and more affordable practice where they're getting close to costing the exact same. There's not very many $25 clinics that that'll do neuters and spays like there are now. There's not a whole lot of those for desexing, but going and doing it yourself privately with your vet, the costs are getting close to the same.
Huh. That's awesome.
It seems like that is it. I don't know.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Like,
it makes sense. Why have we not done this before?
Just hearing it just makes more sense. That's silly.
Because a bunch of vets 30 years ago that had the biggest, at the time, practice of teaching people how to do veterinary care said this is the way that we're going to do it, and they're a bunch of stubborn bastards that refuse to change because they're like, no, we were right, we've been right for 30 years, and this is how we're going to teach everybody that goes through our methods. And that's why.
Very common in healthcare as well, man. It correlates very, very evenly. Well, that's awesome. So
That's
literally,
good news for Oliver.
Yeah, good news for Oliver because he's swinging his nuts around like it's his job. But yeah, I mean, honestly, tell us. So, Greg, we have our dogs. We want to switch them to a raw dog feeding diet. What do we do?
Step one.
Do we just go, hunt a raccoon that's cruising around the neighborhood? Grill it up. No, we don't even need to grill it
Don't
up.
grill it. It's raw.
Skin it.
It's in the name, dude.
We need some feathers, kill some birds.
Ooh.
We've told some stories, Scott. We've told some stories in the past where my dog Leah, the mixed breed that really is a yellow lab, has killed multiple squirrels.
Didn't she eat a bunch of baby rabbits at one point?
Ate a bunch of baby rabbits at one point. I was living in West Virginia for grad school for about a year, and I'm going to give you a little story, and then we'll continue on with you. But I had her outside. She was on a kind of like a run because I was living in I had a small little house outside of the college. What's that?
Is this the squirrel story?
No, different story.
Oh, that's pretty funny too.
But this, I don't know if I've told you this one, Greg, but I left her out there and I heard the family next door start kind of screaming. Not screaming, but being like, oh, what's going on? And I was inside my house, and Leah, my dog, who was outside on her run, there was a rabbit hole in the middle of the yard that I didn't know about. And literally what happened is a rabbit would pop its head out. She would chomp it and then just kind of leave it. And then the next one would pop its head out and she would chomp it and leave it. She didn't eat them. She just, I mean, I know it sounds terrible, but she's basically a serial killer for rabbits. But
she's just playing whack-a-mole, man.
Dude, basically. But the back patio that my neighbors had literally was 10 feet away from where she was doing this. So they were watching her at dinner eat these rabbits and just leave them there. So she killed about 7 rabbits, and I had to go out and clean them up. But
sounds like a perfectly ruined opportunity to feed your dog.
I know. There was about 6 ounces of food on each of those baby rabbits. Could have fed them right to the dog, saved them, froze them, whatever. No, but honestly, tell us how you can kind of get into this. What's the best way to get into it?
So first of all, we'll address really quickly for the budget-minded people out there that if you can't switch completely over, because unless you go through some fairly specific practices, then it can be more expensive. And I try to help people with avoiding that and keeping the cost down as much as possible. But if you can't switch over completely, you still can do things to really help your dog's diet, like taking out 20% of whatever their meal is. Let's say that they get a cup, take 20% of that away, and adding in things like fermented vegetables or just vegetables as a whole, or adding a whole egg on top of your dog's kibble. So there are things that you can do if you can't completely switch over and you're just like, well, I just want to help and do better for my dog, but I can't afford to switch completely over.
Yeah,
so,
and I think my vet has actually done a good job. My dog Leah, she's very lean. I think part of it being that she's mixed breed with a pit bull, but our other dog Utley, he's chunky. So the vet, his first recommendation was try to get him a little more exercise. But also we started doing what you just said about 75% food and then throwing some green beans or whatever it may be, just to make him feel like he's full, but at the same time he's eating a little bit healthier.
Yeah, and having a lower caloric intake too.
Absolutely. Continue though. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good. So there are things that you can do. So search those things out if you are one of those people. But to not those people, but you know what I'm saying.
No, it is those. They are those.
Yeah,
people.
They're the other. Let's be honest.
If you can afford it, there's still stuff that you can do to help your dog live longer, is what I'm trying to say. But if you're wanting to get started completely, you're just like, all right, I'm done with kibble, I'm done with canned food, I'm done with the traditional foods, and I want to switch over. Step 1 would be get your education. And this is going to sound self-serving because I provide this stuff to people professionally, but there are other options beside myself. I do have a course, book, one-on-one stuff, but there are other sources out there. So the number one step, regardless of whether you go with my products or somebody else's, is to get an education of some kind before you start. You can't just go to the store, buy a chicken quarter, buy a couple pounds of, hamburger or whatever it happens to be, and say, poof, I'm feeding my dog raw. I mean, technically you're feeding your dog raw foods, but you're not providing them anything close to what would resemble a balanced diet. So I applaud your enthusiasm if that's what you want to do, but you've got to give yourself some education if what you want to do is help your dog and you're not just switching over because you want to be one of the cool kids.
No, so that makes total sense. And I'm gonna put you on the spot right now because what's your most recent book? Is it Raw Feeding? Is it like the Meal Tracking Journal or something like that?
So the big book, the one that actually teaches people how to do all this stuff, because the raw feeding meal tracking journal is just a way for people to track what they're doing, so that if I've been feeding my dog for 2 months, I'm feeding them raw foods, and all of a sudden the last week they've been sick. You can make your vet love you more than any other client they've ever had by handing them a notebook of saying, this is exactly what my dog has ate for the last month, and this is the day that they started being sick or acting different. Because a lot of the
Got it.
times people just go, well, my dog started feeling or acting weird a couple of days ago. Well, what have you been feeding them? Well, just the normal stuff. I can't really remember. Versus, here's the report.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
perfect.
But the main book is Raw Feeding 101 Beginner's Raw Feeding Guide. It's just under 200 pages, and it goes through essentially everything that I go through in all my other products, whether it's one-on-one or the course or anything. It takes you from dispelling myths, addressing some of the common concerns that people have, links people over to a free video about saving money, takes them from meal 1 all the way through week 4 and what you have to do after week 4 of the transition, whether you should do a 4-week transition or balance everything from the start. So it goes over all of that stuff.
Awesome. So where do you get, I'm going to put you on the spot where, you produced this book, you produced a couple books. Obviously you sound like you know what you're talking about. I'm going to be devil's advocate. Where are you getting this information?
So the number one thing that I would say is experience, because I've been doing it for so long, and I learned from people that had been doing it for much longer than I'm doing it now. Because people say, it's a fad, it's a new thing. It's like, but there's people out there that you can talk to every day that have been doing this for the last 30 plus years that just never did anything else. They never switched over to kibble. They've been breeding dogs or raising dogs or, having champion dogs or farm dogs or whatever it happens to be forever, and they've just never done anything else. So looking at what those people are doing long term, of this is what worked, this is what's produced healthy dogs, while also going through, formal education, things like the Dogs Naturally University certification course. So a combination of, I would say, experience, actual, I won't say collegiate because it's not collegiate, but actual formal education, and then real world practice of, teaching, 23,000 people in a Facebook group and thousands of people on the YouTube channel and hundreds of course students and clients and one-on-one. So a combo of experience, formal education, and this is what I've had people do that's actually produced the results that we want.
Yeah, man, that's the reason I asked that. And I know I said I was putting you on the spot. I was being devil's advocate, but it seems like you're kind of a pioneer, and maybe you're not the pioneer. Maybe there were a few people ahead of you that have been doing it for 30 years and, doing this raw feeding, phenomenon. But it seems like you're the first one to kind of, or maybe not the first, but you're one of the people that are taking this course, to really educate people and take your experience and show them what can be. And you're leveraging although it may not be like a clinical experience, I don't know what kind of clinical trials or what there are with dogs, but you're showing them that, hey, this is what's going to benefit your dog in the long run. And I think that's awesome.
Well, thanks, man. I'm definitely not the first, but I would say one of a small group of people that is, spearheading and pioneering this movement. There's other people like I've already mentioned before, Rodney Habib, Dr. Karen Becker. There's Ronnie Lejeune over at perfectlyrawsome.com. There's Kimberly Gauthier from keepthetailwagging.com, Gregory Lucas. There's so many. I won't say so many. That's an incorrect statement. There's a small group of us that are all working together to make this happen. But when you look at us versus, the traditional pet food companies and the billions of dollars that they have behind them with advertising, it at this point is all about heart and the hours. And I've been doing this for, I would say professionally, for 3 years now, and it's now only starting to gain traction because people are finally going, why did in the 70s Great Danes live to be 17, 18 years old, and now if they make it past 7, they're a senior?
Wow.
So they're waking up to these things and seeking out this information. So with us being the quote unquote pioneers with this information, we already have the long established information out there that people have been using. And so people don't have to go with the person that, a month ago I went and took the Dogs Naturally course, and now I'm a consultant and I can teach you everything. It's like, okay, well, how many people have you actually helped? But I'm not trying to discourage those people. I want those people to keep coming out, and I want there to be more of us, but vet who you're taking your advice from is what I'm trying to say. How long have they been doing it? Have they been feeding raw for 6 months or 6 years? In this area, with so much of it coming from quote unquote anecdotal evidence and experience-based education.
We like to call that bro science.
Bro science, exactly. Yes, bro science. What did and what didn't work for whatever reason. There are some good studies that are coming out and that are trying to be funded, like Pause for Change, which is you could call it a charitable organization that Rodney Habib runs, where that's their exclusive goal is to produce funds to fund these clinical based hard science studies saying these are the diets that we fed and these are the results of those diets. And we have some of those, just not enough to convince a large majority of the professional community to start saying, okay, maybe a diet of 40 to 50% sugar and carbohydrates isn't a good thing, which is crazy that we'd have to have so much evidence to, shake somebody that would never eat that much carbs themselves and say, maybe it's not a good idea for you to recommend that to your clients
or they are because they're a fat ass. Sorry.
Or they are. There you go.
Greg, you had something to say?
I had a quick question here, and you touched on it a little bit, but what are the ethical ramifications of, advocating this raw feeding to dogs without any serious clinical studies and trials, if there are any?
So this is a huge, huge thing. And there are companies that have taken massive, massive steps to only providing and producing foods like Answers Pet Food as an example, and the Bones & Co., who only use high quality, humanely raised meats to produce their products. And of course, because of this, like anything else that's organic and, humanely raised, they're more expensive products. So there are the companies out there that are taking that moral standpoint to the utmost extreme. From my direct perspective, I would say that if you have a moral qualm about feeding your dogs raw meats and, accepting the fact that there's something else that's dying every single day so that your dog can eat these raw foods, if it's a real moral issue for you, then maybe you should consider taking the meat out of your diet or drastically reducing it instead, because we as humans have a much higher tolerance for higher, I would say, produce-based diets, nuts and legumes and fruits and vegetables, while our dogs, while they can and should have a lot of those things in their diet, by nature's design, they are, depending on who you want to ask, they're carnivores. This is what they are designed and what they are supposed to eat. And when they don't eat these things, they have serious health ramifications from it. But you and I and several, millions of other people could do very well on lower meat or no meat diets. So I think this comes to a point of accepting that whether it's a plant, whether it's a nut, whether it's a chicken or a cow, that's the circle of life. For anything else to live, something else has to die. Mm-hmm. So there is no perfect answer because people have to come to their own conclusions. But for example, if I'm processing chickens that I have here at my house, I don't have any right now because we've gone through this process recently.
Your dog ate them all because it's on the raw food diet. Sorry.
Right.
Wow, jumping the gun.
Keep going.
Well, he's not wrong though. But as I am myself processing these animals after providing them the best life that I could while they were here on my property, I thank them. And I know it sounds kind of hippy-dippy, but I literally right before I very brutally to the people that happen to drive by at the moment I'm doing it, cut this animal's head off. thank it for what it's done, the eggs that it's already produced for us, the food that it's already provided for us and the dogs, and what it's going to do from then on, because that's reality. I know that lots of people like to ignore reality in our society right now, but something dies so that you can live. Whether it's your dog, whether it's your cat, whether it's you, your fish, your ferret, I don't care what it is. Even if it's a kibble food, let's say, something died to make the kibble.
Oh yeah, and dude, I don't mean
preaching to the choir over here.
Yeah,
like,
I know
totally okay
we're
with
flying. And Greg and I, we still live, borderline city. We're kind of in the city still. So for me, my fiance is a huge hippie. I'm not going to say she's not. She's a huge hippie, but we're getting eggs on a daily basis from one of her good friends from work who has a chicken coop, and they're utilizing those chickens so we can eat those eggs, because we don't want to buy the fucking dyed eggs from the grocery store to have those. But
Are they dyed Easter colors?
honestly, they're closer to Easter colors when you get them naturally, because they're like orange and they have spots on them and all that kind of stuff.
If they're gonna dye them, they might as well make them festive
Instead of just bleaching them white.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying, man, and it's to this point where, like you said, you just have to kind of look and be like, hey, let's take everything in that we're looking at. Although there's not at this point, although you guys, there's a lot of experiential data. You guys have shown and done this, and we can continuously show that this is what's going on. It's like, hey, as an outsider, look at it and be like, what the fuck are we doing? Do we need to feed our dogs this, or do we need to feed our dogs that? And there's a lot of people that still just suck down cheeseburgers and soda and all that shit.
Well, the biggest example, I think, in human lives is feeding our children cereal, Pop-Tarts, and toaster strudels for breakfast. For the longest time, that was okay. Well, finally we're waking up going, oh, hey, maybe we shouldn't just mainline sugar into our children first thing in the morning.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean that was a big part of the pyramid, the dietitian pyramid, whatever it was. The grains and all that stuff were on the bottom thing. They're like, hey, we need 8 servings of grains before you hit noon. It's like, no, we need the opposite. We need some fats and some, whatever we need. But
fat, protein.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and then you get to the kids thing, coming back to that, and then you go, all right, well, here's your toaster strudel or your like 85% sugar. They have fucking Sour Patch breakfast cereal now. Like, what the hell is that about? Then you get pissed off at the kid and put him on drugs and medication because he can't pay attention in class because he's hyped up on sugar.
And that's like a dog with a ton of energy that you go and get fixed because you think it's going to settle him down and make him behave better, when it's like, well, hey, maybe if we change his diet and give him more exercise, he's going to behave better.
And you stop jacking him up on carbs and sugar every day.
Right. Yeah, and let me throw in like a personal experience, because I'm the oldest of 5. I have 3 brothers and a sister. And my youngest sister, it took a long time, but she's been diagnosed being on like the autism spectrum. And a big portion of what happens with autistic kids, it happens with their diet. So one of the main things that you can do outside of medication is regulate their gut biome. So, although a lot of them want to have sugar, carbohydrates, eating on a irregular schedule, all that kind of stuff, the first thing you can do is to get them on a regulated schedule, and it helps beyond belief. I mean, right now there's no clinical studies, but there will be in the future showing that it's extremely important to focus on that diet and regulating that gut biome to, then move on to mental wellness and all that kind of stuff. So
I totally agree. There's a reason that they're starting to call the gut the second brain.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I drink kombucha on a daily basis because if I don't, I get jacked up, like in every way, physically, mentally. If I don't keep my gut right, which is the huge thing for the dogs as well, the microbiome. I mean, if you're not treating your gut well, you're fucked.
Right, and that makes absolute sense. So, a quick question here. So, I'm absolutely on board with feeding your dog a well, balanced, nutritious diet. Right. There's no surprise when you bring your dog into the vet for diarrhea that he says, "Oh, boil some chicken and give him rice." And what do you know? Within like a day or two, and even pumpkin. Like ground up pumpkin works like miracles, works magic. It's no surprise that when you add a little fiber, protein, and rice into their diet, look, oh my gosh, they get better. Like
Zero sugar.
Right.
Don't feed them Snickers bars, you assholes.
So my question leading into
Funny
that.
you say that because the candy companies like Mars own almost all of the kibble producers now.
Right. So I guess my question is, when the vet recommends chicken, they recommend boiling it. So what's the advantage of feeding a dog a raw diet, and what are the negative side effects? Because I know like parasites, bacteria are probably a big fear of a lot of people who might consider starting this diet. What's the advantage of going raw versus just giving them some boiled chicken or some cooked meat versus completely raw?
So when we cook something, we are essentially in one form denaturing it. We're changing it on just about every level possible. There's of course going to still be stuff in there, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, depending on what it is. But we're changing the physical cellular structure of this thing that we are feeding. And I'll say this. Feeding your dog a cooked home food diet, which you can do and you can balance properly, quote unquote, balance properly, and is leaps beyond feeding only exclusively kibble. And there are amazing people out there that teach that, like Dr. Judy Morgan has several books on exactly how to do that, how to start cooking food for your dogs at home. Amazing woman, as well as Emma Rutherford over in the UK also teaches similar things. So that's huge. That's huge leap forward. But for me, this is just on a, I won't say personal level, but to me, the more steps that we take away from doing what's natural, the more room that we start bringing in for problems and complications. Now, this is not to talk bad about or say that cooking for your dogs is necessarily worse than having raw foods for your dogs, because there are very few exceptions. And I will say there are few exceptions I've ever come across where the dog just struggled with raw food diets that did amazingly after being switched to a home cooked food diet. But for me, providing what they are supposed to eat in the ways that they are supposed to eat it, in the way that they ate it for thousands of years before we ever came along and started fucking with shit, is the ideal way to go. Give them the raw foods in the way that nature designed them to have them. To address the parasites and the Salmonella, E. coli, all these different concerns that people have. I've actually done mock videos on this to show how, while the concern from the pet parent is not ridiculous, the attack on it being so dangerous from certain companies and organizations like the FDA and some of these other food companies is ridiculous. Saying if you feed your dogs raw foods and you have raw chicken in their diets and everything like that, your dog's going to get salmonella, you're going to get salmonella, everybody that comes to your house is going to get salmonella, and everybody's going to die. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because if you take, like, this is a really, in my opinion, funny example. So you tell me, what am I doing? Am I feeding my dog, or am I making Thanksgiving dinner? Let's say I take a turkey out of the freezer, I defrost it, I put it into a pan, and this is an extreme example because it's a whole freaking turkey, but up until that point, you can't tell me which one of those things that I'm doing, whether I'm feeding my dog or whether I am cooking Thanksgiving dinner. The only difference is whether that food goes into the oven afterwards or it goes into my dog. Everything else is the same. You clean up all the stuff that the raw food touched. You do your dishes. You wash your hands. I mean, it's like common sense sanitary stuff. Do your dishes, wash your hands, sanitize contaminated surfaces. Like if you can make a diet or a meal at home that has raw food in it, like tacos from hamburger meat, and everybody in the house doesn't get E. coli poisoning and they get sick, you can feed a raw diet. There are concerns with things like parasites when it comes to sourcing wild foods. So let's say your dog did get a hold of those rabbits, right? And she actually consumed them, right? Mm-hmm. So Where all the nasties like to live, short of specific things like heartworm that obviously live in the heart, but all the nasties that we talk about, like worms and everything, like to live in the intestines. Like that's their jam. So when we take things like wild rabbits because we're a hunter, or we took an elk or a deer, or we went fishing or something like that, we always want to get rid of the guts as far as the intestines go. 'Cause
First
that's
thing you do, yeah.
get rid of it, and then when it comes to the wild foods, freeze it for at least 3 months, because the things other than those guys, there's some other examples like pseudo rabies and stuff, which is a whole other topic, but for the most part, freezing it for 3 weeks or longer kills all these other things that you would have to worry about if you fed it, like the rabbit came out of the hole and now it's in your dog's stomach.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I mean, does it have to do with like freezing up the whatever is water soluble or whatever is like living in the water portion, or I mean, what does that do?
So a large portion of it is stopping the life cycle. So when you start looking at things like bacteria reproducing, once they get past a certain temperature, they can't do that anymore. They can't continue to reproduce because they're so cold. It's the reason why we have things like safe, quote unquote. I shouldn't say quote unquote, but safe room temperatures where, if you start going above 42, 45 degrees, you start getting into the realm of bacterial growth, which is why food places and food joints and grocery stores have temperature gauges all over the place for you to be able to see, and why they have regulations that they have to follow is because once you start getting into that range, then bacteria can actually grow and reproduce and start to cause problems.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and I don't mean to interject with a joke, but
no, you're good.
If I eat too many tacos, it takes about 24 to 48 hours before I can reproduce as well.
There you go.
Just kidding. No. I had to say something, man. You're killing it right now. I'm so Greg and I are sitting here looking at each other across the table. Just our eyes are wide open. So we're very appreciative of what you're saying. The one thing that I wanted to, and I didn't mean to interject, I hope I didn't, you can continue on your thought, but I know that you said you had a kind of a personal story that you wanted to share with us. So I don't know if you want to.
A good dog story.
Well, good or bad, personal.
Personal.
But yeah, I just wanted to hear a little bit about that. But continue where you were. I didn't mean to interject.
No, you're good. That was basically it. I'll just reiterate and kind of summarize and say that if you feed any kind of animal that did not come from the grocery store or a supplier, like an online raw food supplier that's already frozen this food, if you are bringing home a wild animal, the intestines need to be gone and it needs to be frozen for at least 3 weeks before you feed it. I don't care if it's a fish, an elk, a bird, a deer, whatever it is, remove the intestines, freeze it, and then you're in 99.99% of cases, you are good to go with those kinds of things. Again, we can talk about things like pseudo rabies from wild boar, which freezing will not kill, but your pigs from the store that have been regulated by USDA regulations, those are fine. So there you go. There's that.
It's funny you mention intestines. So there's a cat that likes to roam around our house, and it will eat small animals and leave only the intestines. And it loves to leave them right outside the door I let my dog out in, which then my dog, of course, likes to gobble up. So probably should correct that behavior.
Probably, because again, if we start looking at where the nasties like to live, I mean, you can get into things like, ringworm and stuff like that can live essentially anywhere. But for the most part, if you're going to find the nasties, the worms, specifically the parasites, they're hanging out in the intestines because that's where they can get their food and sustenance and the warmth and moisture they want. So that's where they're chilling.
Interesting. I have a question for you, and I know this probably isn't your specialty, but I had to take my dog Leah to the vet today. She just had to do a heartworm checkup. They found that her heartworm test was negative, so hey, great. We all celebrated. Yeah, she was actually great. We went at 8 a.m. on a Saturday, so she didn't even – there's no other dogs there. She just everybody fed her about 1.5 pounds of sugar-filled treats. But do you know anything about having she doesn't have Lyme disease, but she has Lyme contact. Does that make any sense to you? I just wanted to approach you before calling back my vet because I feel like I trust you more now.
What I what I would do is two things. Well, I'll say three things. One, no, I don't know anything about it. Two, but the other two things would be one, to speak to the vet about it and see what they have to say about it. And if it comes to medication recommendations, then I would seek out a secondary opinion from a holistic veterinarian, even if it's only a phone consultation and you tell them what's going on or you send them records, because you can get a lot of alternative options where the medications and the risks associated with the medications aren't necessarily necessary, I guess is what I'll say. And you can do that by, and I'm not associated with these guys at all, I'm just telling you guys because the information's great, ahvma.org, the American Holistic Veterinarian Medicine Association, I believe is what it is. But
AHVMA.
ahvma.org, and you can basically search for holistic veterinarians in your area. And if there's not one in your area, then what I would recommend doing is contacting, whether it's on Facebook or on her website, I believe it's healthydogworkshop.com, but contacting Dr. Laurie, Laurie Koger, Coger. Dr. Laurie Koger is a holistic veterinarian that was trained at Cornell and started out as a traditional vet and has since transitioned into using both traditional and holistic means. So she has a really great perspective from both. And she does essentially virtual consultations, whether it's a video call or a phone call or whatever it happens to be. She can provide holistic level veterinary advice over the phone or video if you don't have a holistic vet in your area. So just because you can't find one in your area or it's 4 hours away, you can still get holistic vet level advice.
No, that's awesome. I appreciate that, man. And we're an hour away from Ithaca?
I have no idea.
Well, yeah. So you recommended I wrote it all down, but I can't remember what the name was. But yeah, I mean, we're so close to Cornell, and actually one of my good family friends is a veterinarian that graduated from Cornell. So
there you go.
I'm sure they have some sort of connection, but that's awesome. That's awesome, man.
What is your, because I don't know New York at all, but what's your guys' proximity to like Albany, New Jersey?
All right, so we live in Rochester, which is as close as you can get to Lake Ontario as a medium-sized city, but we're technically Western New York. If you were to take the state of New York and go from Buffalo as far west as you can go, we're about an hour east, and then you go to Syracuse, to Albany, and then you go downstate towards like Westchester County.
So we're about 3 hours east of Albany.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then we're about 2 hours to PA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also.
So I believe, if I'm not wrong, and if I don't know if Dr. Laurie Koger will ever hear this, but she's a good friend. We've done some interviews together and met at some conferences, but she is based in or around Albany, which is why I was asking, because then you could just go to her. But there you go. That's why I was asking. Random question.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome, man. So before we wrap things up, Greg and I had a couple myths we pulled up.
I want to know the story.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
What's
yeah,
the
tell
story?
the story. Actually, do you want to save it till the end?
No, wait.
Is it a happy story or just like a neutral, or are we going to be sad when we sign off?
Unfortunately, a lot of our dog stories that we tell are clearly from the past, and they always have the dog dying in the end. So hopefully
Nobody died.
Oh, okay, good.
Nobody died, and horrible, terrible things were stopped, we'll say. So it's definitely a happy story, and thank God I got a dog story.
Let's leave it till the end then. Let's leave it till the end.
Okay,
we'll just go
question,
quick.
Scott.
All right, so we have a few things we wanted to bring up. We just pulled up this this website. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I know you'll go attack them. No, I'm just kidding. When it comes to raw dog feeding, dogs are not wolves. Obviously, we kind of covered this. You know, it's not like you're. What Greg's laughing at me, but
No, his dog's in here, and he's like loving on me, but his breath is so smelly. I can't even think.
it's that kibble, bro. It comes in. The other thing that really came up though in the topics that we were looking at was we kind of talked about it, but not really. But when it comes down to like environmental sustainability, so obviously when it comes to humans, we're you can either you think you're eating clean, you think you're a vegan, whatever it is. At some point, though, this food is coming from somewhere. So how do you regulate, where this food's coming from? A lot of vegans think, hey, I'm eating clean. I'm eating all vegetables, whatever it is. I'm not eating eggs, all that. But then you're like, yeah, but you're getting this stuff from a field that is getting fucking plowed through, and they're killing all of these ground resting animals and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, you're killing more animals than I've ever killed eating a cow. So like, how do you approach that situation? And I know I'm kind of like overlapping certain things, but what is it with that?
So, the question being, how do you morally approach it or regulate your sourcing or
kind of
the regulate?
Yeah.
So here is my thoughts, and it's going to be kind of sporadic, but it's a complicated
So is
topic.
my question.
Yeah.
So continue.
So is my life.
The bottom line is that there is no such thing as perfection, okay? And unless you are much better off financially than myself and the vast majority of the population, the concept of feeding everything 100% organic, 100% humanely raised is short of a pipe dream. If you have a 5-pound Chihuahua, then, or even up to like a 15-pound, 12-pound Shih Tzu or something, if you have a small dog, then that's something closer to a realistic thing that you could do, feeding something like Answer's Pet Food or the Bones & Co. food, because they have those quality of sources. But at some point, you have to realize that we live on the planet that we live on. We have the situations that we have, and short of extreme financial strain on yourself, you can only do the best that you can do. So if that means that you feed food that was grass raised, but they weren't grass finished, which does come into contact or come into play when the price is concerned, then great. If you're feeding stuff that didn't have antibiotics used versus stuff that did have antibiotics used, then great. That's another step forward. But again, unless you are crazy, not crazy, but you're super lucky, I guess, at this point, person that has endless amounts of property with farm animals all over the place, and you can just feed whatever you want, give them all organic foods, or you can spend the money to pay somebody else that is doing those kinds of things. Feeding all organic, 100% humanely raised is not an option for the vast majority of the population. So what I say is do the best that you can do and go home feeling good about the fact that you did the best that you could do, because it sounds stupid and repetitive, but that's the best that you could do. You're not, most of us anyways, are not Bill Gates, and we don't have the money to make those kinds of changes. We don't have the money to feed our dogs with exclusively those sources. So you can either say, I'm not going to do anything at all and just keep feeding nothing but completely processed foods and say, I just don't want to fund the kinds of farms and stuff that have those types of animals, when you really are, you just don't think that you are because it doesn't look like meat anymore. Or you can do the best that you can do, because some of the meat sources for the kibbles is just absolutely scary. The animals that were in those kinds of fields that we're talking about that are way too over farmed, that just dropped dead and sat there for 3 or 4 days, and then somebody came and picked it up with a truck and it went to the dog food plant. Or to kind of get into a darker
yeah, no here. That's good. That's as dark as we can go. No, keep going. No, yeah, that's fine. Continue your thought.
But if you start to look at pentobarbital, the kinds of drugs that we use for euthanizing animals, how does that get into our dogs and cats' food? There's one way it gets in there, and I think that everybody can connect the dots. So at the end of the day, you can only do the best that you can do. We live on the planet that we live on, and the best you can do is the best you can do.
I don't think it's repetitive, man.
Said.
Most people don't strive to do the average that they can do. And I think, Greg and I sit over here, we have full-time jobs. You've made this your full-time job. We're all trying to bring the best to whatever we're doing, and I think that having you on here today has been phenomenal. It's been very educational. I've loved it.
This is absolutely the most educational podcast we've done.
Yeah,
and this
for
is
sure, for
fantastic.
sure.
We just want to say
Nice.
thank you. But
Love it.
I am dying to hear this story.
Yeah, I want to hear the story.
Story time.
Thank God it's not negative. Honestly, for the past, this is our 13th episode. We're pretty new. We're pretty green in this podcast game. But probably 8 out of the 13 podcasts, Greg has told a story where the dogs die at the end. So we're happy for you to finish this off without a dog dying.
Yeah, nobody died. And again, terrible things were stopped. So here's the story. In a city that at the time, my wife and I don't remember if we were engaged yet, but girlfriend, fiance, now wife, whatever. We were living together in a town called Provo. And at the time, for the last year or 2 years or some extended period of time, young women were being assaulted by a man that walked a very particular route, and the assaults always happened in the same places along the same exercise / walking paths / everything else. And every time that these women were attacked, they provided a very, very specific description: black pants, black hoodie, young white male, and so on.
Sounds like Scott's Closet.
Greg
There
Wagner.
you go. But one day, shortly after we adopted Wolken, at the time, luckily she doesn't anymore, but I think she's probably going to get mad at me if she ever hears this and I don't get this right, but she's 3+ years into not smoking anymore. But at the time, she was still smoking. And she went outside and brought the dog. Thank goodness. Thank God, Allah, Buddha, whoever you believe in, the universe, whatever. Thank whatevers that she brought the dog with her that time.
Thank the dog, man.
Thank the dog. There you go.
There it is,
that she
buddy.
brought the dog out there because the road that we lived on, we'd never made the connection until after this. The road that we lived on went on a direct line from every single attack that was reported. So on one end of the spectrum was this area, and the other end of the spectrum was a walking path, and there was one street that connected both of the places, and along that street where all the assaults had taken place. And on that street comes walking a guy that fits the exact description, right? He's slender, white male, black pants, black hoodie, and he's walking on one side of the street, walking past my house, sees my wife, stops on one side of the street, looks around, then makes a beeline for my wife in a much faster pace.
What?
And on our side of the street at the time, there were 3 or 4 vehicles that were parked on our side of the street. So from his point of view, all that he could see was a woman smoking a cigarette. What he didn't see was the other hand that was at her side that was holding a leash to a 100-pound German Shepherd.
Yes.
Yeah, this is awesome. My
I love
heart's
this
beating
going.
real fast right now.
Tell me more.
So he gets on the other side of the street to where he's now close enough to where, the hoods of the cars are no longer tall enough to obstruct his view. Wolken sees the guy at the same time that the guy sees Wolken. Wolken perks up, goes into tank mode. His tail goes up, his hackles go up. He didn't bark, according to my wife. He just went into monster mode.
Oh, he
Silent
knew,
killer.
man. He knew,
Silent
dude.
killer.
Dude, they are so smart. They pick up on vibes, and I totally believe that. But stops dead in his tracks, literally, kind of leans forward from the momentum of how fast he stops, and then goes back to his side of the sidewalk and keeps walking. So for all I know, my dog stopped my wife from being just another name on his
Another
list
victim.
of victims.
That is
God
awesome.
Damn. I wish that he just
ate him.
Yeah, just chomped him. That's awesome, dude. I'm so happy that you're safe and your wife is safe, and that your dog was the one that deterred that fucking piece of shit. Sorry to.
No,
No,
you can
he
say
is
it.
a
Getting
total piece
aggressive.
of shit. He is a total piece of shit. And every day, there have been times where I just look at my dog and I'm like, you have earned your meal ticket for life, bro.
Yes.
I don't
Hey,
care what you
yes.
do, how many things you chew up or you shit on. You have earned your meal ticket for life.
There we go.
Hey, you want to walk, bud? You're going. You're going now. Oh man.
All right. I think that's a wrap. What do you think, Scott?
I think that's a wrap, man. Hey, Scott, we appreciate you coming on.
Scott Marshall.
You're the man, dude. I honestly, we came into this, Greg and I are new to the podcast game, as we explained, but this is awesome. I'm glad that we were able to provide a platform for you to get the word out. I'm so glad that you and your wife and your dogs, your 2 dogs, are still safe. But anytime you want to do this again, let us know. But tell everybody who's listening where they can find you.
Yeah, dude, let's do it. Let's do a full walkthrough. Let's just make an entire podcast from start to finish of how to switch. Just to give people what they want.
Yeah.
But as far as my stuff goes, you can find all of it basically on rawfeeding101.com. So you can get linked over to my course, which is Raw Feeding 101. You can get linked over to, I need to put it on there, but eventually the book, which you can find on Amazon, Raw Feeding 101. You can sign up for consultations, send me messages, get over to the YouTube channel again, social stuff, all of it you can find over on rawfeeding101.com. And if for some reason you can't find something on rawfeeding101.com, then just shoot me a message at info@rawfeeding101.com and I'll shoot you to where you need to go.
Awesome. And, dude, you've been so humble. I mean, for everybody listening, Scott is the man when it comes to raw dog feeding. Follow him at DogDadOfficial on Instagram. He is the man. We had a great time. You live out in Utah. You're not Mormon. We talked about that. Nothing wrong with that. But hey, man, we'd love to have you again. Yeah, I know we kind of reached this surface level discussion, but we appreciate it, and we'd love to do it again at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Anytime. You guys name the time and the place, and I'll be here in front of Skype.
All right.
Awesome, buddy. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
You too.
Oh, wait. I can't leave it now. So Greg and I wrap up every episode by saying whack more, bark less. So do you want to do it with us?
Heck yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Greg, Scott, let's do it. Wag more, bark less.
less.
Woo!
Oh, I thought we were going to do a countdown. I totally wasn't even in there.
Sorry. It's even
It's
better.
all right.
It's even better, man. No, all right, we're good. Yo, Scott, thanks a lot, man. That was awesome. Greg, Scott was the man, wasn't
Oh,
he?
yeah.
He
Too
was-
much fun.
He was the man. He was a wealth of knowledge. If you buried him in the Caribbean, you could X marks the spot, and he would be under there.
So what you're trying to say is he's a wealth of knowledge.
Oh my God, dig down, man.
He's
No,
the
but
Fort Knox of raw feeding dogs.
hell yeah, brother. But follow him, Scott J. Marshall. Follow him on Instagram at DogDadOfficial. He's the man. Love him. He literally opened our eyes, didn't he?
Oh, wide awake.
Wide awake. But more importantly, go to barkology.itemorder.com to get some of the gear, the wag swag. You coined the wag swag, didn't you?
I think so.
Yeah, so go to barkology.itemorder.com. We actually ran out of stickers, which is weird. Because,
No, it's not.
Well, who gets stickers?
Skateboarders,
Moms.
van owners, Prius drivers.
Soccer moms. Yes. So go. We ran out, but we have them back. But more importantly, we have crew necks, we have T-shirts, we have sweatpants, we have everything, dude. So
You know what crew necks are good for?
what?
That special date.
That special date. So get them. But yeah, we also have the tumblers as well. But follow us on Instagram, on YouTube, on everywhere you listen to podcasts, Barkology Podcast. Twitter, it's Barkology Pod, because they don't give us the characters to fucking do it. Love you guys. Everybody that listens to the Barkology Podcast, love you guys. Barkology Podcast, wherever you listen. Greg, I love you, man.
Absolutely.
Let's get out of here.
here.